What is the funniest, most memorable moment you've shared with a complete stranger? Studied abroad in Japan once and had some interesting times, both good and bad. One of the good ones was the day I got on a train to visit a temple. I was sitting there, minding my own business, and this elderly Japanese man sits next to me. He had this big, happy grin on his face, and immediately started chatting with me. It took me a second to process that A, he, a Japanese man, had voluntarily started talking to a complete stranger. B, he wasn't being creepy at all. And C, he was speaking perfect, fluent English. Yet, everyone in the country knows a little, but this guy sounded like a native speaker. Also, no one in Japan would start talking with a stranger in a train. We got some weird looks for clearly being two strangers who were launching into conversation. We ended up talking for hours. I wound up missing my stop and we got lunch instead. The guy was really cool. He had studied abroad in America in the 50s, coincidentally in my home state, and had worked for years as a professional translator. He still had a notebook of something he was translating for fun, and I helped him smooth out a few phrases. We talked about religion, politics, food, traveling. I wish I could have talked with him more or at least kept in touch. We eventually just parted ways and I never saw him again. Talking to that man was like being at home again for a little while, and it really helped me move past my homesickness and start interacting more with the people around me, all because we got on the same train. This should be a movie. Japanese man on the train, but less murder. Why? Not funny, but memorable. When I was 19, I worked at a record store. One night, I confronted and tussled with a booster, shoplifter targeting bulk amounts for resale. Unbeknownst to me, he had a box cutter and he opened my face from the top of my ear, near the temple, down to the corner of my mouth. I'm bleeding all over the place and freaking out, as one does. A random customer dressed in chef's whites is the only person in the store not freaking out. He takes me calmly to the employee bathroom, applies a wet compress to my face, and just talks to me very nicely, keeping me as relaxed as possible until the ambulance and police arrived. I'll never forget that guy's kindness and composed demeanor. Never got his name and never saw him again. He's the calming chef, distant cousin to the night nurse. During my freshman year of college, one weekend me and some friends went out drinking, and I had worried too much. I ended up wandering away from my friends so that I could explore the scene, I guess, and ended up passing out in the bushes in the quad on campus. It was pouring rain and I'm not really sure how long I was asleep, but I ended up getting woken up by a guy who walked me back to my dorm while we FaceTimed his girlfriend. Never got his name, but anytime I see him on campus we share the nod. If it wasn't for that guy I would have for sure been arrested, so I'm very thankful. You probably got his name but were too drunk to remember it. Once I was at a gas station. Me and a guy randomly locked eyes like we knew each other. He said hey, so I replied hey man, what's up? He told me everything's cool. Then there was standard conversation. I asked how are the kids? He told me they are starting puberty, etc. He asked me if I am going skiing or coming home from a trip. I had box on top of my car, so we chatted for like 2 minutes. Went inside the gas station and went our separate ways. Few minutes later at the checkout line I was waiting and so was he next to me. He said hey man, I gotta admit. I stopped him and said I don't know you either. He was like thank God. Turns out that the way we looked at each other we thought we are longtime friends, but I had no idea who he was. I was just being polite. So I made a friend. We laughed. His name is Stefan. He has 2 daughters and I have never seen him since. That's just freaking funny. When I was a teenager I worked the night shift at a grocery store. There's some pretty funny folks who do their food shopping overnight. One older guy came in every Wednesday when he was done work around 4 AM. He'd always buy some canned soups and whatnot. When he'd come up to my till, he would take the cans out one by one and roll them down the conveyor belt and try to get them to scan across the machine before plopping into the bag. They never did register on the machine, but it made a mundane job so much more fun. It was such a routine that as the summer was coming to an end, I told him the next week would be my last night shift as I was starting college soon, which was the most I had ever said to him. He congratulated me and promised he would be back the next week. Well, sure enough, the next Wednesday he was back with a small army ration of canned foods. He looked at me and I just knew we would get one of those damned cans to scan into the machine before falling into the bag. It took around 15 tries, but we finally heard that fateful blip as one of the cans slowly rolled across the machine before tumbling into the bag. We jumped, we cheered, we high-fived. I never saw him again. I love you and that mysterious can-rolling desperado. Was at a festival and some girl walked up to me and started talking to me about how her and her boyfriend had just had a big argument. A couple minutes in, her boyfriend storms over and points at me and says, "Who the frick is this guy?" Feeling a bit tired and too worn down to be intimidated or argumentative, I said, "I've got the shoots." He suddenly changes his tune and tells me to try peppermint capsules. Then his girlfriend chimes in and starts talking about charcoal tablets, and the two of them bond over their respective remedies for vibes and walk away wishing me a pleasant evening. Your butthole saved a relationship. I used to work at a hardware store called Menards as a cashier. As part of the job, we're required to have small talk with the guests to make things friendly. Well, this couple comes in my line with a ton of screws. A literal frick ton of screws. The whole cart was full to the brim in boxes of screws. For some dumb reason, the greeting I give them is, "Whoa, looks like you guys have a lot of screwing to do." I immediately realize what I said as my heart drops and they just respond with "huh" as if they didn't hear me. I just continued the small talk for the rest of the checkout while sweating bullets and praying that they didn't hear me imply that they had a lot of upcoming fricking to take care of. I finish the checkout and tell them to have a nice day. Thanks for shopping at Menards. Yada yada yada. Then he grabs the receipt out of the printer box, looks back at his wife and sees she's already walking away, says, "You too? Oh, and you're dang right we have a lot of screwing to do," winks, and walks away. Wow, looks like you guys have a lot of screwing to do. Freeze frame. Save big money at Menards. When I was 15, I was on a tram heading home after school. This lady in her mid-40s who sat across from me asked if I knew where the local town hall was, which is renowned for being a pretty lush concert hall for orchestras and such. I told her it was on my walk home and I'd show her in person. She then proceeded to tell me she was heading to a concert to watch her son play the piano. Being the proud Vietnamese mother she was, she invited me to join. I accepted the request and next minute I find myself sitting in a reserved row with all the extended family members all dressed in formal suit and tux, etc. While I sat there with my backpack and jumper tied around my waist, I was introduced to everyone. Went home afterwards to do my homework and it kicked in. What a strange moment of time that was. For some reason I didn't tell my family my experience and only now I really appreciate that memory. A homeless guy came into the church where I was practicing the organ during the week. At first, he seemed to be sleeping in a pew. Later, he called up to me in the loft and asked if he could see the organ up close, which I was happy to do. He was fascinated with its size and complexity. He told me that he had been a professional painter, but lost his job because of drinking, which he claimed to have since given up, and I believed him. The memorable part was that I introduced him to the pastor, who decided to take a chance and have him do some painting around the church in return for a place to stay on the grounds, a room in the former rectory, and food. It worked out perfectly. The man painted many rooms throughout the campus with professional workmanship and eventually became the church sexton. You guys saved a life. Way to go. The first time I ever smoked weed, I had to get the train back home. I left my friends. High for the first time ever in my life, walked through town and got on the train. I was 13. Got on the train and I was completely freaking out because I'd smoked weed too much. Thought everyone was watching me and paranoia set in. After a couple of stops, a mentally challenged woman of about 30-35 got on with her carer. They sat down and the woman grinned this manic smile at me and made a strange grunting noise. I started giggling. She started giling back. I burst out laughing and she squealed with delight and started laughing back. Before I knew it, we were both howling with laughter for no reason whatsoever and the whole train carriage was staring at us like we were utter lunatics. My paranoia stopped immediately and the woman and I spent the rest of the journey pulling funny faces at each other and laughing. I don't think she was able to speak, but we made a genuine connection nonetheless. I still think about her every now and again. Hope she's okay. She knew. I was in Japan for a combination business pleasure trip. I went to the Hakone region to see stuff. In Hakone I took a ropeway to visit the famous Aokudani volcanic vents. My ropeway car had about 16 people in it, 15 Japanese natives and me. After several minutes of silent travel, an elderly woman spoke to me in broken English. "Where from?" So I answered, "America." This elicited the classic Japanese "ah" and some smiles. Then an elderly gentleman piped up, "Ah, so, where in America?" I didn't want to explain the details of my specific town, so I generalized, "I live in Seattle in Washington state." This brought on confusion. The Japanese looked to each other to see who understood English well enough to interpret what I said. None did, so I took another tack. "Seattle, Mariners, home of Ichiro." Then the whole ropeway exploded. "Ichiro. Hi." A few of the older folks still didn't get it, so I mimed. I stepped up to the plate, swung an invisible bat, then put a hand to cover my eyes as if I had hit a home run, then exclaimed, "Ichiro. Home run." Now they all got it. There were cheers and exclamations of Ichiro, so I mimed Ichiro and me. Same place. Now they got it. Seattle. They understood. For the rest of the ride I was besieged with smiles and bows and kind words. It was wonderful. Thanks, Ichiro. Oh, and Hakone was the highlight of my trip. If you ever visit Japan and travel between Kyoto and Tokyo, spend a few days in Hakone. You will not regret it. Lived in Tokyo. Can confirm. Hakone is awesome and Ichiro is pretty much a deity over there. I was at a gay bar and asked the old guy beside me, "Come here often?" and he answered, "Not since they plastered over the glory holes." This is perfect double entendre. I decided to take a break while driving from one side of the state to the other and stopped at a rest stop. Upon getting out of my car and heading towards the McDonald's Dunkin' Donuts convenience store plaza, I looked down as I came upon a pile of hair. Someone had either lost their weave or got into a rest stop fight and had it pulled out. I said out loud to myself, "That's unbelievable." Some random business guy in a suit and tie passed by and told me to weave it alone. It was the best interaction ever. A real life pun thread. This is a sign that humanity is coming to an end. I was at a black tie event for New Year's Eve. At midnight, they dropped hundreds of balloons from the ceiling and almost instantly people started to pop them. An hour or so later, drunk me decides to roam around to see if I can find an unpopped balloon. After 15 or so minutes of searching, I find one by the DJ table and start walking back to my group of friends with it. This guy, who also has a balloon, stops me and yells, "You found one too?" We were instantly friends and referred to each other as Balloon Guy for the rest of the night. I imagined you as Jerry from Rick and Morty for some odd reason. I was in a Steak and Shake about 10 years ago in the summer at 2 a.m. Not sure if you have been to a fine establishment such as this, but at the end of the meal you get up and pay at the register. A girl is paying for her food and at the end of the transaction goes, "Keep the change, you filthy animal, allow home alone." The entire place erupted in laughter. It warms my heart to think that at that Steak and Shake at 2 a.m. we were all united in the Christmas spirit. Steak and Shake at 2 a.m. is the crap. Me and a buddy went in to get late nights to go milkshakes and were playing hack sack in the lobby and the dude on the register joined in. I was in a hostel in Paris and dead tired from the flight over from, I think, Minneapolis anyways. It was just me and some girl from Argentina who was equally tired. The room had bedding for 6. It was 6 in the evening and I'd already showered and lying in bed flipping through a guidebook. She'd just showered and lying in bed flipping through a guidebook. We kinda stared at each other and I asked her if she wanted to go somewhere since it was still early. She didn't speak a word of English, which is fair cause I didn't speak a word of Spanish. Neither of us spoke a word of French either. So I point to a photo in my book and she points to a photo in hers and off we went exploring Paris. Despite the language barrier, it turned out to be one of my favorite memories. My only regret is that I dropped off a roll of film somewhere in Georgia, US back in January 08 and promptly forgot about it. Malin, if you're seeing this and can read English, hope you also had fun. If anyone ever developed film in Hinesville, Georgia in January 2008 and saw a roll of an Asian dude and a white girl in Paris, that's mine. Hope they turned out well. This sounds like the start of a love story where the guy goes on the craziest hunt to find the girl, while she does the same, completely missing each other until they both give up. And that moment, when they both give up, they sit on the same bench at an airport where each would be leaving back to their respective homes, just to find each other again in pure joy. I work at a well-known book retailer, where we push memberships on our shoppers. An older couple came in, but paid separately. It was clear they weren't married, so I assumed either they were friends or just dating. The woman pays first, and uses her member card. When I ring up the man, I ask if he's a member as well. He says no, but asks if he can use hers. I chuckle and say that he can, as they're friends and family memberships. He looks me dead in the eye, and goes, "I hope that applies for friends with benefits." Till, grandpa has more game than I do. On my 18th birthday I was on my way to Vienna to meet up with my GF at the time. I had arrived the morning before my birthday but got restless and decided to just take random trains. I ended up in Zagreb that night but didn't want to spend money on a hostel, so I got a piece of cardboard and started sleeping in front of the station. My then GF was from Zagreb, hence my desire to see her hometown even though I was alone. After an hour or so a security guard told me to follow him back to his office. I figured I was getting arrested, but was 17, for a few more hours, and didn't give a crap. When we got there he said it's dangerous, you can sleep in here. We started chatting. He spoke English really well, and said he learned it from The Simpsons. He said I caramba and no problemo a lot. We chain smoked together, and talked. We went through 6-pack of cigarettes that night. Walter Wolf I think the brand was called. We talked about women. He'd just met a girl but wasn't sure if he was in love. The war since he was ethnically Croatian from Bosnia. He said he hated Serbs but hated himself for hating them. Music, wages, 19 kun an hour. We drank Coca-Cola and joked about getting some H. He tried to find some but they were too expensive. At 3 AM we went to another guard shack and made Bosnian coffee, which he said was the best coffee in the world. It was shockingly delicious. At one point he asked if I wanted a hat. I said yes, and I had indeed been looking for a hat. He gave me a Nazujsko Pivo hat. I'm sure I still have it somewhere. I gave him a CD one been listening to. At 7 AM I walked out of the shack, could barely inhale, and got on a train for Budapest, which is a story in and of itself. But I made it to Vienna eventually, met up with my GF and her family and had a nice couple of days. This was 2004. He was 25 then, 15 during the war. I saw him from the window of a train a year later but didn't say anything. Never saw him again after that. TLDR. On my 18th birthday I hung out all night in the security office at the Zagreb train station with one of the guards. I have ulcerative colitis, which means my stomach hates me most of the time. Was at a bar with my husband and some friends when my bowels start doing their thing and I need to run to the bathroom. There were 2 stalls in there, and when I went in there was no one else there, so I thought I'd hurry and get it over with before anyone else entered. I barely had time to sit down before someone else entered, so I tried to go as quietly as possible. So this other person sits down and I can hear the start-up sounds of explosive diarrhea before she senses there's someone else in the next stall. The sounds stop and I imagine she was thinking to try and hold it until I left. I was nowhere near done, so I just say, I was mildly drunk. Hey, I have chronic stomach problems. I know what it's like. Pooping sounds don't bother me anymore, so you just let it out, and I'll do the same. So we sat there, next to each other with a thin wall between us, crapping our intestines out. Afterwards we washed our hands, gave a slight smile to each other, and went our separate ways. Was sitting at a blackjack table in Vegas. A new player, who was very drunk, sat down at the table. He gets his cards. It was a lower hand and he goes to say hit I think. Instead he goes hi URGLHA and pukes across the table. After a few seconds of silent disgust the guy just picked up his non-played chips and walks away. Everyone left at the table just burst out laughing. Well, it's not a particularly life-changing, but I still remember it to this day. I was just walking around an outdoor mall with my family. We hadn't been there before so we were wandering around looking for a clothing store or something like that. I decided to actually look at one of those maps malls place up. As I read the map, I couldn't really tell where I was so I decided to back up and get a more full picture of the sign. Little did I know there was a huge blatantly obvious pillar behind me. I bump right into it. Normally just a dumb little shock and the moment's over. But not this time. As it happens, this black guy I have never seen before or since says loudly and joyfully, "Who put that there?" I was so amazed by what happened and how quickly I couldn't help but laugh. The event quickly became an inside joke among all my friends as we shout "Who put that there" to every situation. Note, I'm not trying to stereotype any race or dialect, simply conveying things as they happened. That's freaking hilarious. I'd make an inside joke that, too. Last Halloween I was meeting up with friends on the Lower East Side of Manhattan. I was dressed as Mario, hat, gloves and all. I was waiting outside a bar for a friend and looked up to see a fully dressed Luigi staring at me out of an apartment window. We stared at each other for some time. I looked around to see if anyone else was seeing this, and when I looked up, my mysterious friend had disappeared. It would be hilarious to dress up as Luigi and just discreetly photobomb Marios all night. When they look back over the pictures, they see a disgruntled Luigi in the background of all their pictures. Went to pick my sister up from the bar she works at. Two of the punters stumbled into my car and gave me their address. Shocked, I sat in silence and they slowly realized I was not a taxi. Then we all laughed. They got out, and I never met them ever again. At a small festival and was waiting for my wife to use one of the many porta potties lined up. Up walks this old couple and the wife stands near me as her husband seeks out a porta potty to use. Sure enough, he picked the one my wife was in and she hadn't locked the door. He flings it open and we all see her sitting there, pants around her ankles. She has a look of tremendous fear on her face and the old man is embarrassed that he just walked in on this young lady, saying, "I'm sorry, but you should have locked the dang door." It happened in about 4 seconds, but me and the old man's wife are laughing our asses off having witnessed the entire thing. Paid a bus ticket for a guy once. Well, not really for him, but for his 20-year-old dog. Guy hadn't any money with him and would be forced to walk 2 hours to his destination if the bus driver wouldn't let him in. He just hugged me while crying, saying thank you 1,000 times. We'll never forget that. Doggo does a public transportation. I was working at a retail chain store right after graduating college. Just kept my crappy job from college while I looked for real work. This really old black man comes in, we get to chatting. I mention in passing that I had a degree in science. He got really excited and asked if I knew about X and Y and Z thing in science, and we ended up having like an hour-long chat about the contributions of Oppenheimer. Probably the coolest, nicest man I saw in years working retail. It was more of a group of strangers. You know those pirate ship rides at the amusement park? Yeah, it was near closing time, so I chose that to be my last ride. It began to rock slowly as usual, and as the side I was on gained reasonable height, people started to scream. The people screaming thing is a normal thing anyone would expect when they ride this. So when the other side went up and then down, they screamed but just a little louder. What ensued was a screaming competition between the two sides. I don't know why, but it always makes me happy to think back to the time I had a screaming competition with strangers. I've had that happen on the pirate ship too. Fun times. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.